Well, good morning, everyone. Happy Tuesday morning to you, and welcome back to Morning Musings. My name is Don K. Preston. I'm the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. And boy, how I appreciate you being with me. All right. It's every single morning, right? I get on and I get on YouTube to see the comments. Now, I don't always have time to respond, and I apologize for that. Occasionally, this happened just recently. Somebody that had never posted on my page, somebody whose name I did not know, he popped up on my page making a couple of really nasty, really sarcastic, really arrogant comments. Well, I responded to him and I told him that kind of language is not allowed on my forum. And he went back and forth, back and forth. Well, life happened for a couple of days, and I didn't get back to him immediately. So he posts this really nasty post that says, "Well, I see you're unable to answer me, and you're refusing to answer me, which must prove that you know you're wrong." Kind of amazing, isn't it? That someone can come out of absolute nowhere, and they think that I ought to drop everything that I'm doing. They think that I ought to drop all correspondence with everyone else that I've been corresponding with. And all of a sudden, just wow, focus just on them. Kind of an inflated sense of self-importance. Or so it seems to me. But nonetheless, I do my best to try to engage, to try to be involved as much as I can. My workload just seems to be getting more and more and more, which is a good thing, by the way. But nonetheless, I hope you'll be patient with me when I do not answer comments or even questions that you might have. It's not that I'm trying to avoid anyone, all right? Someone posted to me just this morning, and I had not responded to this individual in 2 or 3 days. To be honest about it, I had overlooked their post. But anyway, I had forgotten about it. And they simply posted and they said, "You must be busy." And I literally laughed out loud and I responded. I said, "Yeah, that's an understatement of humongous proportions." So, yeah, I'm busy. But I told somebody just yesterday, honestly, I'm having the time of my life. I absolutely love what I do. I love sharing. I love studying. I love writing. I love engaging. There's not a whole lot about what I am blessed to be doing. Not a whole lot that I don't just absolutely love and enjoy. And you're a part of that, all right, by watching my YouTube videos. All right, so this is the next to the last video in our series on the Olivet Discourse. Tomorrow I'm going to give a summary. Boy, it's going to be hard to give a summary in just, 17, 18, even 20 minutes. But nonetheless, I'm going to seek to do that. This morning's video is really, really, really critical to what I'll be sharing with you tomorrow in my summary. So by doing it this morning, it will segue into that summary and be a vital and integral part of the summary, and that is this. Pardon me. Wow. No matter what else we might think of Matthew 25:31 and following, as I demonstrated yesterday, Matthew chapter 25:31 and following is drawing, this kind of came out of nowhere, it is drawing directly on Joel chapter 2 and Joel chapter 3. Remember Joel 3, verse 1 and 2. After the promise and the prophecy of Joel 28-32 about the last days being poured out before the coming of the great and terrible day of the Lord, the prophecy was given in those days, last days, and at that time, the great and terrible day of the Lord, I will gather all nations to judgment. Well, that's just Matthew 25:31 and following. So what's the point, Preston? The point is this. Whatever else we might think about it, Matthew 25:31 and following is about the fulfillment of God's Old Covenant promises made to Old Covenant Israel. After all, Joel chapter 3 talks about the avenging of the blood of the martyrs. That's not talking about the avenging of any blood of any martyrs in America, or in the 17th, 18th, 19th, 20th, 21st century. It's unrelated to that. The subject of the martyrdom of the martyrs and their vindication in the last days is related to the fulfillment of God's Old Covenant promises made to Old Covenant Israel. Isaiah 2 through 4, prophecy of the last days, prophecy of the great and terrible day of the Lord, Isaiah chapter 2, 19 to 21, prophecy of the avenging of the blood of the martyrs, Isaiah chapter 4, verse 4. All of that to happen at the time of the judgment of Jerusalem in the last days. Isaiah 3. Sorry, folks. Like I said, this just really kind of hit me. Almost out of the clear blue. I really haven't been having any trouble otherwise this morning. So, when we see that the great and terrible day of the Lord is the time of the avenging of the martyrs at the judgment of Israel, and somebody says, well, where do you find the subject? Someone, as we were in the process of going through the Olivet Discourse, they said, I don't see any reference to the martyrs in Matthew 25:31 and following. There's that good old missing word hermeneutic. I wonder how that's alienated and separated from the promise of Matthew chapter 23 about all of the blood of all the righteous, all the way back to Abel, righteous Abel. All of that blood being vindicated in that generation. I wonder how it's disconnected from the fact that Jesus said this gospel of the kingdom would be preached in all the world as a witness to the nations, and his promise, his threat to the apostles, that as they went, you're going to be brought before kings, before governors, before the Sanhedrins. But they were told, give no thought to what you shall say in that hour, for the Holy Spirit shall give you what you shall say. And your enemies will not be able to answer the wisdom of your words. Mark chapter 13, 9 and following. So here's the persecution as they went preaching. Matthew chapter 20. How do you delineate between Matthew 25:31 and following and the preaching of the gospel into all the world and that persecution? And Jesus said, I was in prison. And some will say, well, Lord, when did we see you in prison? What were they doing in prison? Oh, could be they had been, or they were being persecuted for being the followers of Jesus. It's a rather myopic view of Matthew chapter 25:31 and following to divorce it from everything in the previous context. And let me remind you, folks, that the reason why people try to delineate Matthew chapter 25:31 and following, or the entirety of Matthew chapter 25 for that matter, from the foregoing discussion is because they acknowledge that in Matthew 24:4 to 35, or verse 34, if you please, Jesus was talking about the end of the Old Covenant age at his coming in AD 70. Now watch this. The very people who tried to dichotomize between Matthew 25:31 and following, or Matthew 25:1 and following, etc., from his discussion of the coming of the destruction of Jerusalem, is because it's a time of judgment. It's a time of reward. Well, okay. It's the coming of the Son of Man with his angels to sit on his throne, to judge, to reward, and to judge. Well, in Matthew chapter 24, 29 to following, it's the coming of the Son of Man. Verse 30. To do what? To judge and to reward. He shall send forth his angels with a shout, with the sound of the great trumpet. They shall gather together the elect. We have every constituent element. Well, somebody says, oh, Matthew 24, 29, 31, you don't have the gathering of the nations. Well, let's see, they shall gather together the elect out of the, where? From the four winds? From everywhere under heaven? That's not the nations? Oh, well, in Matthew 25, 31 and following, you don't have the sun being darkened, the moon being turned to blood, the stars of heaven being shaken, and the powers of heaven are being shaken. Really? It's the judgment of all nations. And yet, interestingly enough, the very people who want to make that claim, that delineation, they understand that the language of Matthew 24, 29 and following is highly apocalyptic, metaphoric, non-literal, non-physical language. Steve Gregg admits that. Kenneth Gentry does. Many futurists admit that. So it's literally grasping at straws, but again, here's the point. This is all about God fulfilling his promises made to Old Covenant Israel, those prophecies found in the Old Testament. Now, what does that mean? It means that Israel, the 12 tribes, have to, either had to or has to exist at the so-called end of time. Now, you know, the problem here is, ladies and gentlemen, that when you read the Jewish encyclopedia, they say there is no homogeneous nation descended from Abraham that exists in the world today. That's from the Jewish encyclopedia. Collier's encyclopedia, the American encyclopedia, one encyclopedia after another, one anthropological study after another, says and admits there is no such thing as a nation descended from Abraham that exists in the world today. Well, listen. If there is no such thing as a nation of the 12 tribes of Israel, to whom those Old Testament prophecies were made, if that nation does not exist, and let me assure you, ladies and gentlemen, the nation that is living in the Middle East today is not biblical Old Covenant Israel. They're Talmudic, Sephardic, Ashkenaz, etc. And somebody might jump up and say, oh, well, you know, how do you know that there's not some individuals over there that have some DNA? Well, listen, ancient Near Eastern Semitic DNA can be found literally in virtually, not everyone, but in virtually every nation under heaven. Does that mean that every nation under heaven is national Israel of the 12 tribes? No, it does not. My point is this. Since the nation of Israel had to or has to exist at the time of the fulfillment of Matthew chapter 25, 31 and following, then since that nation, Old Covenant, biblically based, Tanakh based, Old Covenant Israel does not exist today. That means that either the promise of Matthew 25:31 and following failed, or it means that it was fulfilled at a time when the 12 tribes of Israel still existed as a nation. Do you catch the power of that? Doesn't do any good to say, oh, well, over there in Ethiopia, they think they found some people that have DNA in them. Doesn't matter. They are not biblical Old Covenant Israel. And that is the point. Thanks for joining me for this morning's morning musings. And look, the ramifications of this are absolutely profound. Every single, quote, New Testament prophecy, unquote, is really honestly nothing but the reiteration of, the explanation of, the expansion of, the application of God's Old Covenant promises made to Old Covenant Israel. Final thought, I'm sorry, I just have to do this. Since those were Old Covenant promises made to Old Covenant Israel, does it not make perfect sense that those promises would be fulfilled at the end, at the termination, the consummation of her covenant age, to bring that Old Covenant age to its end and thus to usher in the everlasting, unending kingdom of Messiah, instead of positing the fulfillment of all of those Old Testament prophecies at the end of the New Covenant age, which ostensibly has nothing to do with Israel, Old Covenant Israel, and her promises? You see the disparity? Okay. I'm out of time. Thanks again for joining me. I'll see you on the flip side.